So I just want to explain what it is that I'm attempting to do here. We're at the end of scanning, and this is going to be at the beginning of the video, but the purpose of this video is really to compare this scanner and this scanner. I tried to throw the Pop2 in here as well and scan against that, and they're so different that it doesn't make sense. The range and the Shining 3D are the exact same price right now, and I wanted to see, this is supposed to be for scanning larger objects. This bandsaw here is a larger object, large, kind of perfect size for this thing as far as I'm concerned. The Shining 3D, it will do a variety. It's not really in comparison to the, say, Mini, which I do own, but the range, yeah, these two things are in direct competition, and we're trying to figure out, how to quantify to some degree one versus the other. And I think I've done a reasonable job. This bandsaw frame is part of a project for me, and I want to be able to machine components and adapt them to fit this. And I think that through the course of this, I'll have really shown how I'm going to do that, and the accuracy required and such. For me, I don't need or don't expect 0.01 millimeter resolution. It's great if you got it. I'm not going to spend another $9,000 to get there, because I'm not. This isn't a job, this is a hobby, and as a hobbyist, this is kind of where I'm at. I could spend maybe up to $4,000 or $5,000 on one and still be okay with it, but I'd really, we're all trying to save some money as much as we reasonably can. But yeah, at the price of these, $1,000 US per one, which one wins? Which one gives you the best result? Which one gives you the least frustration? I didn't think that mattered. It does. It absolutely does. And yeah, when these two things are the exact same price, which one wins out? So we're going to take a look at that. We're going to scan this in a number of ways. We're going to do things with speeds. Right now, got them bolted to the router, which you'll see in here, kind of how they react in a very stable environment as far as the speed that they move at. The machine is capable of maintaining very, very consistent speeds, and you can really directly compare them. I wish I could, if I had another laptop here, I could probably, I guess I could do it on my phone, but I'm not going to. I can bolt both of them at the exact same time and just go side by side which one wins. I don't think I need to do that. A little bit of a explanation of how I ended up doing this is that I had backed the Revopoint Mini, and I had seen nothing but good things. I didn't read the spec sheet well enough, I guess. When it was up on Kickstarter, it showed up. I was initially quite impressed because I tried scanning a statue that was quite small, and it worked really well for that, or appeared to. But that wasn't my main purpose. My main purpose was more things like this, not necessarily this big, but there's always a bigger thing or a smaller thing or whatever that you want to scan. So after backing the Mini, and really getting into trying it in other settings, I started to get a bit frustrated, and then stumbled on the Shining 3D Einstar. I could not at that time, this has changed since then, but at that point I could not find videos that I felt confident in what they were saying. I was concerned that I was going to end up with the same kind of problems. So I reached out to Shining 3D, told them what I was doing. We had a conversation, literally a video call, and I explained what my frustrations were, and asked them if I could try theirs out, and then I wouldn't sugarcoat it. I would tell them what the issues were, but I would tell everybody else at the same time, and it's not to bash anybody, and they agreed. So they sent me this. I don't get to keep it. It's got to go back. It's just a loan program, but it'll give me a chance, I think, to really explain the pluses and the minuses and what you can realistically expect out of this, especially if you're coming from Revopoint, or if you have a Revopoint product. You'll be able to kind of see how these two things compare. So we'll get into the scanning. We'll go through some comparisons, and I'll give you kind of what I think. Obviously, you choose what you do, but where you want to spend your money, and the more information, the better. Yeah. So let's see how they compare, and see what the pluses and the minuses are, or where they do good, where they do bad, and just how they stack up against each other. Overall, this thing is 105 centimeters or 41.5 inches by about 16 inches, 40 centimeters. Not very thick, which actually makes this more challenging. Around 3 inches, a little bit more, 75 millimeters, 7.5 centimeters. One of the things that will make this challenging is hole locations. Flat surfaces, not super concerned about, but hole locations are critical, and I'm going to have to come up with a solution to pick up these threaded holes and not threaded holes. And then the skin of it, well, it is just a skin pretty much. It's very thin, 3/8 of an inch, 9 mil roughly, in that realm with some webbing. Webbing doesn't, again, I think it's important to determine what it is you're trying to do. A lot of people don't do that. They kind of think they want it all, and that's a nice theory, but you are not going to find, I don't think, a scanner that is going to do everything for you that you think you want. One, in a price point that you're willing to pay. If you're watching this video, you are not going to go and buy a $200,000 scanner. You're looking at the $1,000 to $2,000 scanners, and there's a reason for that. And you got to use them for that. There is a time and a place for a tape measure. There is a time and a place for calipers. I've got a lot of machine tools, and I have done perfectly fine with all the measuring tools that I have that most machine shops would have, and you can get those at a reasonably low price for what they are, and they'll do really, really well. It's when you get into this kind of thing, in my opinion, that it becomes a bigger issue, that you end up with compounding errors that bite you. So yeah, some of these things are really geared towards people that are model makers and stuff like that. The Mini is a great example of that. It's something that I've seen really heavily, for whatever reason, like geared towards people who are doing at-home dentistry, which seems insane to me, but it is what it is. But it just, for that level of detail, that is probably a reasonable product for doing that kind of thing. Is it good for this? Probably not. That's kind of what the Pop2 and the range are kind of supposed to do. The range is supposed to go bigger. It's supposed to be for scanning people for some reason. I'm sure that's for video game assets and things along those lines. But yeah, you got to pick what it is you care about and how far you want to go with it. I would love to have every single bump from the sand casting process here in the model, in a way, and it to be perfectly accurate. But really, I don't care. I care about recreating this thing in a 3D space so that then I can do what I need to, whether that is figure out what I want to alter on this or how I want to fit to it. And something else to consider is maybe you do it the opposite way. Maybe you scrounge together, however you do it, whether it's just horrible welding and cutting and stuff like that, but you make something fit, then you scan that, and then you take those dimensions and you turn them into something usable after the fact, and you remake that part. And there's nothing wrong with doing it that way. That's a pretty common way of doing it. But yeah, it's important to have that conversation, because a lot of people think that they need a level of accuracy that is really not necessary for most things. So we'll I don't know, we'll pop out one of the scanners, I guess, and we'll get started. I'll tell you what I do and I don't like about each one as we go here. If there are those things, I'm sure there are, and yeah, we'll try them out, see what the end result is, and Okay, so we're gonna do an object. Yeah, it's probably a medium. We don't need like a 1/2 mil is pretty good resolution. I don't really care about the texture for what I'm doing. We're going to use features and markers. Apply. Let's see how she does here. Definitely going to need to turn the brightness up. It's the camera. There's another way to... There we go. So we're definitely inside the good range. So this is just the way that the Einstar is. It's just fast and efficient and looks good. We got the data quality indicator turned on, which means it'll go between green, I think, and red if you don't have enough information. So let's just get started here. Now we're scanning.
The part that I really want to get across is the ability for this scanner to track and pick back up on the features when it loses track. I'm not doing the best job of keeping it at a distance because it's very hard to do that. But it does fine even when you are in and out of its range. And as soon as it loses tracking, it tells you, but it takes almost nothing for it to figure out where it is in the world, especially with markers, but just any sort of unique features, it really does a good job of just snapping back into where it should be.
Clearly don't care about that orange on the table because it's going to come off. I'm kind of getting these cavities, yeah. We got lots of green. Come in here and try and get a decent look at that hole. We lost tracking, but it picked it up. It's picking up the angle grinder that's on the table. Now let's come and see if it'll get these hex bolts fairly well. Like, look at how fast it's moving. And I think what's happening is it's using the computer to do the processing as opposed to the hardware, and that's fine. Like, got a expensive computer, use it, and don't try and pawn this off on something so it can be used on your phone, which I think is just insane. But okay, that's a scan. We're at 3 minutes, and I know I've got a good scan. Compare that to everything else you saw or have or will see out of the Revopoint stuff, and you are not going to get a good scan in 3 minutes. It just is not going to happen. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, I got a little bit to pick up around the throat of the saw there. Well, let's just do it because we can. Oh, knows where it is. Like, no fighting with it. We're green on the side there. Markers are required. Yeah, I know they are. You can see enough markers. There. Kind of struggling in here, but that's not really its fault. We're at green. 5 minutes. That is a very usable scan. Like, very, very usable. One thing I'm going to do, I'm actually going to rescan this because it doesn't take any time and you're not fighting with it. I'm going to space this off the table so it's a lot easier for me to cut the table surface off, so that when I go to flip it and scan the backside, not that I even really need to for the purposes of what I'm planning on doing, but just so that I can easily cut it off, flip it over, and then scan the back side of it and stitch them together.
This is actually fairly difficult to scan, I think, because of the thickness of the material. It's just not that thick. So there isn't these big curves that then, or something that then flips over into the other surface. So ways around that would probably be to add things, whether that's plasticine or a magnet of some sort or something that it can pick up on multiple surfaces, to really get that idea of how it flips over.
Thinking about it a bit more, I think that this wouldn't really have an issue if we got a scan that included that text on the top of, um, or potentially some of the kind of corners that are fairly unique. Um, but yeah, there's a number of options to get this to flip over. With the 3/8 wall, it doesn't have much of a ledge to grab onto, which makes it a bit different, but it did okay in the end. Uh, so hand scanning with the range, we'll just try a couple things, see how it compares. We're just going to use the out of the box settings except for auto exposure because I always set auto exposure. And right away it picks up a bunch of markers. You saw the red dots and they seem to disappear and then it skips. And this is a really common thing that I've experienced with the Revopoint stuff. They tend to either skip or spiral out. It drives me nuts. But they added the undo function for those reasons. So you kind of stop the scan, go and undo some frames, and then try and resume. But anyway, we'll continue on with a new scan, and I'm starting with more complex features and then working my way out from there so that it kind of has boundaries that it can run into, so to prevent it from doing this runaway situation. And it seems to be taking it fairly well. The auto exposure seems to not update fast enough, in my opinion. You'll see in the top left, it'll kind of every couple seconds maybe make an adjustment. There was one. But it doesn't seem to happen as frequently as I think it should, maybe to help this thing along, but that's just is what it is. And I seem to be moving really slow for 11.5 frames per second, in my opinion. Compared to how fast the Einstar you can walk around with it, it sure seems like this is moving real slow. Um, but that's what it requires to try and get a decent scan. So I'm going to another corner now to try and fill in some of the scan data, and it has no idea what's going on. Like, to me, it seems like there's a lot of features there. It should be able to see and align up, but so until I rotate it, then all of a sudden it picks up. You can see the edges of the scan versus the edges of the or what's currently being scanned versus the edges of what was there before. Like it is not in line. And I don't like I don't know if that would have sorted itself out or not, but it sure feels like nothing is aligned when you're scanning with this. It's all just a little bit off and then a little bit more off, and yeah, it just drives me nuts myself. So it kind of planted a piece of the scan on the table for some reason, and that just is what it is. So again, the undo button is there to try and deal with these things. So you could undo back a little bit and try and continue on. That scan to me doesn't look good though. It looks really noisy. You can see like the surface of the bandsaw seems to just kind of go out, and you can see all the dice actually are the best indicator. The dice and the markers, they have this duplication effect or ghosting. So we'll wipe this one out and we'll try it again, but we're going to switch over from feature tracking to marker tracking, and that should help if it's really focusing on the markers. I I believe I've been told or heard that that it does both at any given time, but yeah, and we'll go into just a vanilla scan with no texture, And it's clearly got lots of markers, and it does a good job at this point, I'd say. It's tracking better. It's not struggling through finding itself for the most part. It does lose track, but then it does pick it back up. It just seems to take it a long time comparatively. And like right there, it had no idea where it was. And then it kind of did, but it rotated off by 20 degrees. So every time that happens, there's potential for your scan to get contaminated with 1, 2, 10 frames. And then it'll try and continue on from that point potentially. And you're really in trouble. So you have to stop, undo those frames that were contaminated, go back in, and keep doing those kind of steps. And it takes time and adds frustration. But it is doing what it needs to do here. A couple things that would have really helped this would be probably, I've been told, is scanning spray and changing the environment a little bit, um, getting no sunlight in the room, and controlling the lighting a lot better. This is not flooded out with light or anything like that, but yeah, it probably would have helped it. I didn't use scanning spray or paint this thing white because I don't really want to do that if I can avoid it generally. It's either very expensive for the true sublimating ones, or you have to wash it off, and it's a powder, it gets everywhere. And the Einstar doesn't require it. In certain instances it will, but for this, it didn't need it. It was doing just fine with the exact same environment, and it didn't feel right to me to handicap or give a handicap to the Revopoint stuff just so that it would kind of function reasonably well. I'm trying to compare, the Einstar to the Revopoint stuff, and the Revopoint can do it this way, so I want to see their range and Pop2, Pop3 um, do it this way. I don't think that I should cater to those requirements because this is more of a real world example that is applicable in my opinion. So we're going to try and resume, and it does it. Like it's got a lot of markers. It's got a lot of information. It should be able to. I mean, that's a reasonable scan, I would say. As far as just looking at it, it appears to be a reasonable scan. I don't know if it is or not. It may have the potato chip effect, like I've encountered with the Revopoint stuff before, where it twists the scans. But yeah, that's a scan you could try and use to a lot of people if you were probably doing something that wasn't critical to dimensions and planes and stuff like that. That would probably work, and you could probably work that into something that would be sufficient for what you're doing. But it really feels very noisy, and that could be rendering. It might not be as noisy as it looks. When you do the point cloud stuff, it may clean up. But again, it's one more step. And every time you have one more step you have to do just to find out if you're getting a good result, you're taking away from the productivity, and it's adding frustration. And most of my problems that I've had with the Revopoint stuff have been frustration, and that's why I wanted to see what the Einstar was capable of, and if it created less frustration for me. And yeah, so we'll try the Pop2 and Pop3 and see how they do, and then we'll get on to machine scanning. So scanning with the Pop2 by hand, and we're just using the standard things: high accuracy, feature tracking, the general object. I shut off the surfaces because I think that's more reasonable. Um, we're actually going to switch over to marker tracking here because there's markers, and I'm going to try and get it to hold on to them. It should give it a better stick, but once we get started here, it can't find enough there. Field of view, I guess in that little blue square in the top left is kind of where you have to have 3 markers, which is going to be pretty hard for me to do. But when we get over here, we'll get 3, and it takes a frame and then cannot align to that frame again. And it is what it is. I'm sure that some of this is my fault. I could have put more markers on, but I didn't. I didn't want to. I didn't want to, really overdo the markers because you only have so many, and you don't want to have them everywhere. If you look at anybody else's videos scanning larger things with Pop2, they have to have them all over the place. It's a lot. But we'll just cancel that out and go to a standard accuracy to try and get the frame rate up and change the tracking mode to feature tracking. And it starts out, right away starts taking data, which it should. And I'm trying to keep, something unique-ish in the field of view of it so it doesn't take off on me. And then as I go around this flange or cutout, you'll see that it looks like it starts to curl. Like it's not square. The thing is definitely square, but it looks like it's starting to like curl down on the top. I don't know where that error comes from. It may have fixed it when I went into if I went into point cloud fusing or something like that. And then yeah, we end up in this kind of it taken off a little bit. So we'll back up some frames and see if we can recover this. And yeah, it's doing the same thing, so we'll back it up again. Good thing we got an undo button because we're going to use it. It's a bit annoying as well that there is no preview like the Einstar has. Hopefully they get something like that so you can see if it's actually sitting in the right area before you start scanning. You have to start scanning and then then you see what it's deciding that geometry and everything matches up with. So it is getting the basic geometry of this. It's finding its way around. It's not really taking off. I don't think that scan looks amazing, but I don't know. I mean, you can't tell until you've went and done your point cloud thing, which is not great. It makes it take more time and add more frustration. And if it hasn't got it, you gotta go and cut parts of it off and go back and try and get it to give you what you want. So that looks really hard to tell if that's any good, but yeah, I mean, it is a scan, but there's clearly some issues with it, and it's not happening very fast. We'll try undoing and picking up on the text because that's a fairly unique thing. And I don't know how it came up with that area, but we'll have to go and do the same thing. Stop, undo some frames, and try and start again. And this is just a reoccurring theme for sure with this scanner, is that you're just going to be scanning a bit, undoing some of it, trying to scan again if you can get a good scan. Really, you're probably better off to once you've lost it, to undo the frames that have caused you issues and just start a new scan and plan on doing an alignment and fusing together later, because it just seems like that's really the only way you can actually get away with not ending up with kind of corrupted scans from some sort of error data that happened before that you didn't catch. And these are, scanners inherently kind of have compounding issues because they're all based on the previous information. And so when that information starts to skew, if you're going in what you're scanning is supposed to be a straight line, but one frame all of a sudden twists just a little bit. Like, we're not talking about much. If it twists 0.11 degrees and then you do your next scan and it aligns to that, and a couple scans later it does the same thing, you're in trouble fast. So that actually, that scan to me turned out okay. It's less noisy than kind of what I expected. I think that's usable. Um, I don't know about how accurate it is geometrically or anything like that, but as far as what it looks like to me, that looks like a usable scan. But we've done one tiny little corner. We got a whole saw body to go just for this one component out of, I don't know how many are in that saw, probably 70. Um, they're not all this large, but yeah, you're gonna have to spend a lot of time to get um, all of these things. So you probably need what, a dozen scans, maybe more, to get this whole saw body into one component, and that's assuming that the data is good. So, and I can see around that flange area, it looks like skipping to me. It doesn't look like just missing data. It looks like it's actually skipped. So yeah, that's the Pop 2. So the Pop 3 is kind of supposed to be a new and improved version, I believe, of this, hence the name. But I believe that's, they're supposed to have a similar side working area and field of view and stuff like that, but better tracking. And so setting up to scan on the router with the Einstar, I'm using the CNC router as kind of the fixture to do these scans with all the scanners, because I think it will give the best unbiased or uninfluenced, I should say, result. This will move at a consistent rate, consistent height, and I don't have to toy with anything, and I'm not introducing errors to it that could then be seen as some sort of influence over it. Um, on the Einstar, we're going to do object, medium and large object, and we're going to use an alignment mode of hybrid with features and markers. This has markers all over it, and I think those two things make the most sense for what you're doing or what I'm doing, and I think generally that would make the most sense. We're using a really low resolution or high resolution, 0.2 millimeter. I don't think that's necessary. I think that's unrealistic to ask that out of a scanner generally, let alone at this price point. Um, I think, I'm not certain about this, but I believe that 0.2 millimeters means if you had a flat surface that it would only go up or down a maximum of 0.2 millimeters. Kind of, that would be your deviation. It may be that you actually take that and split it in half. I'm not 100% sure, but if you need that kind of sub half millimeter from a flat plane, if you needed that kind of accuracy, this is not the way you should be really inspecting that. I don't think so, and I'm not texture scanning because I don't need that. I tend to run this at full brightness. I will toy with it and try and get it, down so that it's it's a little bit better exposure, but typically in my experience, just maxing out the brightness has worked just fine. And if you need to, you can always tweak it as you go along, but I don't think it's really necessary. I don't know if that's a hardware difference. I know that my experience with the Revopoint stuff, it seemed like it was a lot more sensitive to being in its right band. This seems less like that. And I'm setting it to about 400-ish millimeters, 16 inches, I think that works out to. Uh, that should be kind of, it should be where it wants to be, and that should also account for any deviations because this thing isn't dead flat on there. It's stood up from the underside of the saw body. Yeah, and you can see the preview looks good. If you adjust that working distance, you can actually strip off the table, but I think it'll give it something else, or I thought it would give it something else to kind of bite onto in the event it needed more um, to scan just to keep alignment. That turned out to be that kind of issue. And I'm sitting right now in order just to see how it does as far as picking up points. Like you can see that we're at 100,000 points and only 42 frames, and it slowly, as if you stop, the frames won't increase, but the points will. So it's gathering more information. If I stop on a red spot and I just let it sit for a minute, the point total will increase, but it'll start to taper off because it's filling in everything it needs to know. This is me running max speed across the saw, which is well over 6 meters a minute. Like it's fast. It's very fast. You can see in the top right how quick it's actually moving. The two streams got out of sync for whatever reason, which is kind of annoying, but you can see how rapidly this thing is just whipping across this and not losing track. It's not getting the best quality data, but that's not the point. Like the purpose of me doing this was just to see at what point would this lose tracking. You can always go back and fill in your scan after, but to get a good fundamental scan, you know, it's very fast. So there you go, a good starting scan. You can always go back in and fill it in as required. Set up on the router with the Pop3 now. You can see that we're getting 12.6. We'll actually get up to 14 frames per second, which I believe matches the Einstar, allegedly. Yeah, I tend to use auto exposure on these things. I'm not typically concerned about textures, same thing as before, and I'd like this just to scan as fast as possible and track as fast as possible. Unfortunately, we only have the option of feature or marker tracking, so we're going to try it in feature first. General object, yeah, shut off color scanning, toying with the distance a little bit just to see if that's going to help kind of get the range better. It cuts off the table, like if you set it to the right depth, it'll cut off the table surface, but I think I'd rather have that for tracking. Just gives it one more thing to register on. And we'll get scanning. And I'm going to leave it for a second, get it to get a good bite. This doesn't tell you anything about how many points it's captured. It's only telling you frames, and it's kind of interesting that this is counting frames without moving. The Einstar, if you stop moving, the frame count doesn't increase. So it's smart enough. I don't know if that's a gyro thing or what, but it's smart enough that it knows that you're sitting in a stationary position. So we're moving, and it just takes off. And this is just such a standard problem that I encountered. This was a movement of maybe 12 inches. This would have been at 4-ish meters per minute, maybe even slightly less. And we had it skip off, so it clearly didn't work. That's fine. I'm just gonna have to readjust and try it again, see if we can get a better speed for this thing. So I drop it down in the end here to 1.7. I'm gonna try high accuracy, see if that helps anything. I'm worried about the frame rate being the limiting factor here, but we'll try scanning. So now we're scanning at that 1.7 meters a minute. And I mean, we're clipping along, but the scan just doesn't look very good to me. I'm not sure why I accidentally moved the wrong direction there, but and then we start spiraling out, and I don't know why this is such an issue. And this is a very, very common issue, and this was a huge part of my complaints before with this, or what really was driving me nuts about the Revopoint, all the Revopoint products, is that they have this tendency to just spin out of control, and then it crashes for whatever reason. But yeah, they have this tendency of just spiraling out of control, and I don't understand what it is that's causing that. These are all supposed to have internal gyros, so they should be able to detect rotational and whatever movement in all axes or axes. That's kind of how they are supposed to make their decisions about where in the world you're moving to. So it clearly isn't working as well as it should, but yeah, every one of them seems to do it. So we'll try marker tracking now, high accuracy. Might actually switch over to standard accuracy, but marker tracking, we've got lots of markers, just as many as before, and this should give it a better chance to hold on and kind of stick and not lose tracking. So we're just moving across it again, right around that 1.7 meters a minute. And it's clearly able to see the markers and doing a good job of registering this part. It does tend to move in chunks and kind of fill in behind, which is to me very frustrating because you don't fully know what it's doing. I don't know how it lost tracking here. To me, it had plenty of things to pick up on, but there it can only see 4 of the markers. I guess that's a bit of a stretch on it. So there's 4, 5, 6 markers, and it's holding, but it still lost it. And at any given time here, it had the ability to see at least 4 markers. So I'm not really sure. I'm sure you could pepper this thing with more markers in order to try and mitigate this, but yeah, it's a very frustrating problem. Let's pick it up now. So I just really struggle to understand why this scanner has such a problem holding tracking. And this was always my complaint, and problem with this, like the Revopoint scanners, is that they just really struggle to hold on to their tracking, and it makes the whole process really difficult. I, it's doing okay at this point. I mean, it's a little hard to tell so far, but I think it's collecting a decent scan. It's just if you compare the time that it's taking for this to take place, it's just dramatically different. And here's one of these things where it's not able to understand what just happened there, and so we end up with this big spike sticking out of it. Revopoint's solution to this was to add an undo, which does help, lets you back it up a little bit and get rid of those things. But you don't want to do it. It's contaminating your scan, it's slowing you down, and it's making the whole process just not very enjoyable. But there's a surface scan. And the other thing in here is when you go and merge these, it will make a bunch of fine adjustments to each frame and figure out how they should fit together. And it can do a really good job of cleaning them up. Previously, you could not undo that. I think now you can if it's wrong, because you could get some really bizarre results. Sometimes it would really do a good job, or quite good job compared to what your scan looked like. You'll see it here coming up when the point cloud is all worked out. It'll kind of tighten up and get less rough and stuff like that. But knowing that after the fact is fairly useless. You want to know that as soon as possible so you can make decisions about how you're going to continue on scanning. So there you go. The whole thing kind of cleaned up, um, with the exception of those parts that are kicked out. Yeah, it's very bizarre that the way that it does that, and it's to me it's very frustrating because it just slows down the process. And this on these scanners is not a fast process to begin with comparatively. Uh, yeah, so it's a scan. It looks much noisier to me. Uh, that may just be the way that they're rendering it. I'm not certain, but it sure seems like I understand I'm in the raw mode, but it sure seems like it's a rougher surface, which would be harder to get averages off, in my opinion. It's usable for certain things, absolutely. But if you look at the amount of time it takes to get these scans versus get, a whole surface with the Einstar, it there's just no contest there. It just seems to always fall to the Einstar as the winner, in my opinion. And yeah, I think it's just a better scanner, unfortunately. And I hope Revopoint, if somebody ends up watching this, that you guys figure this out, because I don't think it's so much a hardware issue. I really think this is going to fall down to software, and I think that uh, the product could be a lot better, and it may end up getting there. It's just going to take some time, maybe. But by then, there might be an Einstar 2 or whatever, and it might just blow it out of the water again. I'm not really sure. Set up with the range on the router. Exact same kind of setup as the Einstar or the Pop, just with the arm holding it on the Z part of the router. Using the same settings I tend to use, just auto exposure. No color tracking because I don't think that's necessary. And trying to get it into that excellent band as far as height. That'll deviate a little bit just based on the elevation change as we move across. This thing wasn't sitting 100% flat on the router's table. We can toy with the scanning distance a little bit here just to see if that helps, but it's not really worth it. So we'll get going on the scan and see how it does. This will be scanning at 6 meters a minute. And right off the hop, loses track. Not overly surprising. That's a very fast speed. I wouldn't be doing that by hand, that's for sure. And I wouldn't expect it to work with these scanners. I'm incredibly impressed that it worked with the Einstar, but yeah, it's not a surprise to me that it didn't like that. So we'll restart it here and see how it does around 3.5, maybe a little bit less meters a minute. Same kind of thing, just bunches up, loses track. This is saying that it's 11 frames per second, but if it were 11 frames per second, I would hope that it would be able to hang on to that. So I have a bit of a tough time buying the speed. But we'll try it again here. We'll slow it down to that 1.7 meters a minute. And now it's able to track. Sorry I didn't get any of the actual video with it on the router, but it's the same as the other ones were. So it's doing okay at that. You can see those at the beginning of the scan, the waves that show up in it. And I'm not really certain. Like that's a frame rate thing for sure. The machine isn't hopping. So it is a capture rate issue, and I don't understand what causes that. You just have to slow down more, I guess. But that would bring us into like a dramatically lower speed than what the Einstar is capable of for sure. But that's a scan. I'm sure it would have cleaned up a bit if we had got to fusing, but so we'll switch it over to standard accuracy now. Same settings, start on the other side and use the same speed, see if that helps it. And still that waving. I left that, you can see in the bottom left, there's a fixture plate on the table. And it's there just to give it some more tracking information as it passes over that difficult kind of thin section. Still not the best scan. Guess I didn't have auto. No, I did have auto exposure on, I think. It's hard to tell. This is a frustrating part of Revopoint software that it resets a bunch of this stuff when you stop scans and then or restart them. So we'll try it again. Still those bands, those black bands. It's clearly stretching out the body, in to me at least, it appears like it is. But it got a scan of it for sure. But even sitting over top of it on this side of it, it created that kind of waving effect. They all do it to some degree. It's just how dramatic it is. But you can even see it kind of as I zoom in and out, that the waves, I guess, where it's overlapping frames, and it's able to fill it in better and then worse and better and worse. It does get better with fusing, but I don't know if that's so much that it's actually better or if it's just hiding it. And I did speed up the fusing there just to not waste the time. The Revopoint software is faster at fusing. I don't know that means anything. That's really hard to tell. But generally speaking, between the raw and the fused model, like when you do that step, it is quicker. But yeah, I don't know if that really means much of anything. So you can see it kind of cleaned it up as I went into the fused. I'm not doing the best job of really displaying that. It's a little hard to show, but it does clean up a bit. There's the waves again, even in the fused, you can still see them, especially on the left-hand side there where you have a big solid surface. You can see those bands going up. We'll try it again, see what happens here. All the same settings. It looks like a decent-ish scan. It still had the same problem with the waves, but that just kind of seems to be what it is. Have to slow down more or go over sections multiple times, I guess. So trying the bottom of the saw to see how it does with this kind of surface where it's looking into it. There is more ribbing from the castings and stuff like that on there, which could or be good, could be bad. It is repeating a lot of the time, so that isn't an ideal thing, but at the same time, it can see quite a bit of it at any given time, so it shouldn't have as many issues with tracking. Yeah. So going across it looks pretty good. Still getting the waves, but that's to be expected. It hasn't lost track, which is quite remarkable. But yeah, that to me is kind of a good base scan. I don't know about as far as the dimensions and things like that, but it seems to have got the fundamental idea. And then I rapid it back and it's got no idea where those pieces go. I'm actually surprised that it even attempted to fill them in moving that fast, because that was at 13 meters a minute, I believe. So it was, yeah, not overly surprising that it made a mistake there. We'll try it again, slow it down. Believe we're scanning probably somewhere around 1.3 meters a minute here. And it's doing okay. It doesn't lose tracking, but it starts to distort the top of the saw here. It's continually curling down and to the left in relation to what it had scanned before, and I don't know why it does that. And then it snaps. There was one right there, and it adjusts everything behind it. And I don't know how it makes those decisions. Like right now, it's clearly off, and you're going to see as we get to the bottom right of this part, it has no idea what to do with this piece, and it kind of tries to align it, but I don't know what it's aligning it to, because it doesn't have any information about this. So it makes me question kind of what the end result truly is, but I can only guess so much at what it's doing. So now we've lost tracking, and we're not lost tracking, but well, effectively lost tracking. It has no idea where it is. We come to the right side, and it has information about this part already. It's got no idea where it goes. And I don't know why it decided to go there, but yeah, it's made that decision, and now it's too late. Of course, if you were doing this by hand and you were really, on it and really trying to get like a perfect result, you'd be stopping it and undoing some frames. But this is one of the issues that I had always had with the Revopoint stuff is once you've lost tracking, getting it to go back to where it was, giving it a good solid piece that it's okay with is difficult.
Try this again.
So yeah, we'll try scanning, in at a slower speed, giving it as much information about one component or one portion of this as possible, and then moving on. I think we dropped down to about 70 centimeters a minute, so 2 and a bit feet. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Yeah, but we'll see if that gives it a chance to fill this in better, get a better kind of orientation to build off of. I don't really know. This thing has all 3D scanners as far as I'm aware. I'm sure like when you get into the real budget ones, this isn't true, but these ones should all have gyros in them, so they're able to understand how it's accelerating. So when you move it across an object, it knows that it is being pushed in space that direction. So it should have a fairly good idea. I don't know if there's an orientation thing that matters there, but so it should have a concept of kind of how it's moving in space and be able to make determinations based on that. Kind of bobbing along, and it's getting good data at this point. It always, to me, these scans always look fuzzy, and I don't know why that is. They always have this hazy appearance to them. And I'm not sure, if that's just irrelevant and in the end it kind of comes out in the wash or what. But yeah, if you go over the same section multiple times, you clean up those wavy marks again based on frame rate, how quick I'm moving, things like that. But yeah, it seems like it's doing okay. I really wish the auto exposure would refresh faster because it really feels like it struggles.
This is one of the things that always
So here it's doing that weird, like they've misaligned, and I don't know how it's going to figure out how to put those pieces back together correctly. Like it just did it there, but I don't know how it did it, and it does concern me that the geometry of that would no longer be correct.
You never know until you merge, I believe, your scans.
A lot of these things also get cleaned up with the merging process, and yeah, but you can end up with those stray kind of phantom scan things, and they're frustrating to deal with, to say the least. So now, and I think this may be an indication that there's something wrong with the gyro in this. But yeah, look at the top of the saw, and it's just all over the place. It's this weird, goes up and then levels out again kind of effect. I believe it's going to snap it back into place here, but I don't know why. Like that is not what we're looking at as far as an object. It does not look like that on the top, that's for sure.
Nobody can say that this thing doesn't have enough markers.
It's got piles of markers on this side too, so it should have no issue gluing this all together and aligning it. And then for some reason, it just, scanning's over. It's tired. It's done, I guess.
Scanning, software decided to stop. All that good for now.
I don't know what happened there or why it decided that, but yeah, so that's a scan of it, but it just really doesn't look very good to me. It looks bent and like it's got a lot of haze to it, but and there's still waves on the right hand side there for some reason. So here's the finished result of that, and you can see it's got these duplicating effects on the left hand side. You can really see it because that's where the markers were. Yeah, and those are the things that just really don't seem right to me. That if you're getting kind of this bumping effect, something's off in the geometry.
So I just did the intro for this, even though there's a little bit more to go, mostly computer stuff. But, so what do I think? What do you guys think? And I will give you my opinion. It is with a bit of bias, not because the Einstar was loaned to me, but because I already owned a Revopoint and I was already frustrated with it. But I think that what you've seen, especially machine mounted, or just in general, I think what you've seen kind of speaks for itself, that when you're talking about two products that are the exact same price, that this wins. It is faster, it's more reliable, it gives you a better result, and yeah, this has the least amount of frustration by far. This, on the other hand, I don't trust it fully because I'll probably throw some video in there, but I've had like bent scans. Now that could still, I haven't had enough time with this, but I haven't spent a lot of time with these either. And I haven't really encountered that with the Einstar. I definitely encountered it with the Revopoint. Maybe it's the curve to the range, I don't know. But I've definitely had issues with it. Ending up with bent planes, things that I know that are quite flat, kind of becoming a bit of a potato chip. There's probably ways to work around it. I don't want to work around it. I just want it to work. And that's the key to this, is I didn't think that the frustration, if I was comparing a $10,000 scanner to a $1,000 scanner, I would agree that there is a certain amount of frustration that is worth that price difference. At the exact same price, that doesn't count anymore. You can't discredit that. So I think I did a reasonable job of not being biased towards this one or against this one, but I already know from my initial experience what Revopoint has kind of produced. Having said that, Revopoint has got better. Their software has got better. Yeah, they have listened about some of those things. So to anybody from Revopoint who decides to listen at this part, spend more time on your software. Spend more time and money on your software. Come up with a subscription model that allows you versions or something like that. I don't want to pay, I will not buy a scanner from you and pay a monthly fee. I won't do that. Just into perpetuity. That will not happen under any circumstances. What I would do is I would buy version 2. I guess we're at 5, whatever. I would buy version 5, and as long as version 5 continues to get improved until version 6 comes out 12 months later, not a week, not a month, give me a reasonable amount of time, but as long as I own it through that version and I can always access it, that's your way of making enough money back out of that system. I understand that Shiny 3D, because they make expensive products as well, that their software is going to be better. I fully understand that. It doesn't matter because they're the same price. That's like, that doesn't make any difference. If you want to sell this for $500 and this will continue to be $1,000, maybe you've got an argument. But if this is $1,000 and that's $1,000, then whatever other external factors make this better than this don't matter. You're competing on the same plane. This one's losing, this one's winning. I trust that when I scan something with this, that it is accurate, that I'm not going to spend 2 hours fighting with it, that I'm not going to have to, excessively, obviously there are tweaks that have to be made to lighting, things like that, but I wouldn't have to excessively get it to, the 0.1 of a degree of ambient temperature, which is almost the way that everybody that I've seen on Facebook and YouTube that are fanboys of Revopoint, for whatever reason, I don't really care, but they've always got an excuse as to how to get this thing to act right. I don't want to have to succumb to what this thing needs for its very particular environment. I want something that I can pick up, throw down some markers. These things on magnets work great. Throw down some markers and get the result I need in a reasonable amount of time. And this does that, and this one will not. Not that I've found, at least. If you have a permanent setup and a rotary table and all these things, and which is fine, those aren't unrealistic, but if you almost have to have like a photo booth set up for this thing, as where this one is much more adaptable to its environment. Yes, things have to be changed slightly, but I can do that with these plus and minus things. I can throw down some markers. This came with 2 little bricks of markers, like not bricks, sheets of markers. This one, I don't know if it's because they were sending it to me, but it came with like a bunch of markers, enough that I don't feel like I'm gypped. The markers aren't cheap. They're not the most expensive thing. They're consumable, but it just adds to it. But yeah, I truly believe that this wins, and I fully believe that this is worth the money. And I feel like this is not even remotely close to being worth the money, only because there is this option. If this didn't exist in the world, the range, whatever, the Pop2, the Mini, not Pop1, because everything I've seen about that isn't good. If there was another option, different story, if they're worth that money. But because the Einstar does exist, I believe that the Einstar is the one you should buy. That's my opinion. There are lots of videos out there about how to scan with this. Often the people that are really frustrated with using this are not making a video about that part. Like they do. I can think of a couple, Eric Strobel, he just kind of writes it off. Struble, I believe is his name. Writes it off right away because it is just so frustrating to use, and he's somebody who's getting paid for his time, so every minute counts. But 95% of the people, at least, who have a bad experience with this, you won't hear from them. People who are having a bad experience with Revopoint products all that much, to the point where, and I can understand this, but Revopoint actually goes into their Facebook groups that are set up for their scanners and removes negative comments, which is a bit deceiving in my opinion. I mean, listen to your fan base, I guess. Listen to your consumers, because they are the ones that dictate sales later out. So the only plus that I will give this thing is, or Revopoint products in general, is that they are trying to also include the ability to use them on a phone. And I went and bought a new phone when I first got my Mini for that purpose. So you can take this and you can go scan whatever, and go into a park and scan a statue. At the same time, one of the funnier parts about that is that you will never go into a park and scan a statue with this, probably. I mean, I'm not going to go try it, but because all the conditions will be wrong. It'll be the wrong color. It'll be way too much natural sunlight. You'll need markers, all those things. So you can't even do that. You have the mobility, but you can only use that so flexibly. Generally speaking, I would take this with a laptop and do whatever I needed to do, and that would probably satisfy that. It might even be possible, I'd have to check on the voltage, it's 12 volts. Yeah, maybe there's a way to rig up some sort of external power supply so you could really try and make this thing remote. I think it's stupid. I don't think you should do it. I don't think that's realistic for this. It's kind of a novelty thing. It has some very unique situations where it would help you accomplish something, but there are so many stumblings and pitfalls to that, and frustrations along the way, that I don't think it's worth it. I think that you're better off to just plan to do these kind of things in a bit of a controlled environment, and use the Einstar. But that's my opinion. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if there's something I missed about this. Let me know if there's something that is glaringly obvious that I'm not picking up with. give me your fanboy stories about how I'm doing this all wrong and I didn't put, you know, a marker at the exact right spot, or it was too warm or it was too cold or whatever. I don't really care. But go ahead, you know, give me the feedback, but don't be surprised when I tell you that you're wrong. And I can handle a bit of criticism. But I will definitely engage you if you're telling me that everything I'm saying is wrong, and that, you know, I don't know what I'm talking about. I've used this, I've used that. That's how I ended up with this, was because I was so frustrated with Revopoint's stuff. And I think it's important that everybody knows that this truly is an option, and that it is worth the money if you're comparing the two. And I'm disappointed I didn't know that prior, but it's what it is. Yeah. So thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions. I can't scan everything in the world. I'm not going to get into very one-off kind of situations. I don't think it's worth it. But if you got something simple I can try, and just throw up a video after scanning it and say, hey, this is the result I got, this is how I got there, I'm fine with doing that. Yeah.